it's something that's not only going to affect us, but people for generations to come, you know? So, yeah, thanks for coming. We have a few really great speakers lined up for today. The first one I'm going to introduce now is Nina Babiars from Public Watchdogs. They have an incredible lawsuit that she's going to mention and speak about, and also talk a little bit about what Edison is doing in regards to emergency planning and funding and stuff, and kind of the corruption that's gone on in that sector. So give a round of applause for Nina.
Well, good morning, everybody. Actually, my name is Nina Babiars. It's spelled just like Nina, but I'm with Public Watchdogs. We're headquartered in San Diego, and we've been working with Gary and Lori Hedrick and many others up here in Orange County, because we believe that we shouldn't be separated by this geological thing called Camp Pendleton. We need to come together on this issue. And I'm with Public Watchdogs. We're a nonprofit organization. My visor tells it all. It's because we feel the public has a right to know. And we'll go out anytime, anywhere to do a presentation. Just get on our website or get a card, and we'll be happy to come out to any group. But I want to talk about something this morning very briefly that most people are completely unaware of, and that is back in 2015, Edison, when they closed the plant because of the radiation leak in 2011, when they closed the plant in 2012, they then applied for massive emergency planning exemptions. I want to say that again. Massive emergency planning exemptions to the Nuclear Regulatory Commission because, quote unquote, the plant is closed and the risk is low. Well, that had nothing to do with this crap they're planning to bury on the beach, that the plant was closed. But they were granted those emergency planning exemptions by the Nuclear Regulatory Commission anyway, and 24 hours later, they changed the emergency plan to accommodate those emergency planning exemptions. And there's details on our website. We put it in very simple terms so anybody can read it and understand all this acronym means. But, you know, emergency planning and emergency planning response is the core to every person standing here and many of those who aren't here this morning. I also like to acknowledge Roger Johnson here in San Clemente. I don't know if Roger's here this morning. There you are. Roger, give a hand to Roger. Because Roger revealed that your own city of San Clemente, as well as many other cities that have been provided funding on an annual basis for specifically for nuclear incident preparedness. I think here in San Clemente is $193,000 a year, as well as some other cities. They're not spending all that money. They actually for years, have been giving some of that money back unspent and unused for emergency planning and response, specifically allocated for a nuclear incident with regard to San Onofre. This is unacceptable. And so, you know, you people need to become more informed. You're on the front lines of this thing. And emergency planning and response is key to the public safety. So I appreciate you all being here, and I would like you to follow Public Watchdogs on November 14th, filed a lawsuit against the federal government. And the reason that we did that is we had two people, one in become a board member, a retired Air Force JAG, an attorney for the Air Force, that brought to our attention that 5 days before the California Coastal Commission granted Edison a permit to bury this nuclear waste 108 feet from the Pacific Ocean, the Navy actually warned the California Coastal Commission that they did not have the authority nor the jurisdiction to do that. And the reason they didn't is because back in 1963, it took a congressional act of Congress to give the Navy the authority to allow Edison to put that nuclear generating plant in operation, and nothing else. Specifically, nothing else. Not a nuclear waste dump, certainly. And so the California Coastal Commission actually signed off the U.S. Navy, and the public watchdogs is suing the federal government, and we've already been assigned a judge, and she's going to make a determination as to whether or not this would go to trial or be thrown out. If it's thrown out, we're going to appeal, and if it goes to trial, of course, we're going to pursue it. Because not only does the people have a right to know, but the California Coastal Commission did not have the jurisdiction nor the authority to grant that permit. So thank you so much for being here this morning. Really appreciate you.
Well, I have the privilege of introducing Lori Donchak, our council member who's been just a stalwart in this problem ever since before the shutdown. She stood up against the NRC, FEMA, and told them this is not going to be business as usual anymore, and that's music to our ears because no one else in the public domain where leaders you would expect to come to your support have disappointed us, and no one's come stronger than Lori Donchak, and I appreciate her so much, and thank you for being here. You have the authority.
Yeah. So I'm a former school teacher. I'll try to use my outdoor voice. First of all 5 of us on the city council are committed to making sure the right thing happens down at San Onofre Nuclear Generation Station. On that, we're united. So I wanted you to know that. I have 3 things I want to say today. One is something you can do is cause Senator Kamala Harris to come and visit San Onofre. We haven't had a senatorial visit since 2012 with the Blue Ribbon Commission, and here's why she needs to come. Dry cask storage is being contemplated in an area where there are 8 million people who live there. We are a tsunami hazard. We are a fire hazard. We are an earthquake hazard. We have essential rail commerce going back and forth along our shoreline, and we have a freeway. You can look at a Google map and think putting that dry cask storage in isn't such a bad idea. It's a terrible idea, and those in Washington need to understand it. So if I could ask one thing, if you stop listening to me now, that's fine. Just write Kamala Harris an email or a letter causing her to come and visit firsthand. Because I'll tell you what, water knows no boundaries. We have people here from Huntington Beach, we have people here from Oceanside. Should something go wrong, it affects the whole coast of Southern California and our neighbors to the south. So that's my first point. My second point, which is related, is with this dry cask storage happening, it's a temporary interim storage idea, but in fact it's not, because that waste will be in our community for at least 50 years. All right, so there's this notion that was put forth by the Blue Ribbon Commission of consent-based communities, consent-based host communities. San Clemente never consented. We never said, this is a good idea. Yet, we have the equivalent of permanent storage going on 10 miles to our south. So your city council this year, we're going to be looking for ways to get some sort of protections or remediations for this inevitable event that's going to begin in January. People have asked. The conversion of the rods from pools to dry cask starts right after the first of the year. It's a 15-month process ending at the end of 2019. So as a city, we're going to go forward, and the kinds of things that fall in the bucket of social justice are what we're going to be looking for. And then my last point, which builds on Nina's point, has to do with the emergency services. Our emergency services at SONGS become discretionary at the end of next year. That's not okay. And she is correct, about $193,000 goes to our city. Orange County gets another $400,000. Dana Point gets $193,000. San Juan Capistrano gets $193,000. There's a big bucket of money there. So we're working with lawmakers in Sacramento to make sure that emergency service stays in place until the decommissioning is complete. We may be stepping up and asking you to help us with that if the bill gets off its ship and goes forward in 2018. So finally, I want to thank you all, and I especially want to thank the Hedricks, Gary and Lori Hedrick, for being
All right, everybody. Next speaker is one that I was really stoked to hear was going to make it. Her name is Rose Alley, and her and her husband, Bob Alley, they both, Bill Alley, co-authored a book together called Too Hot to Touch. Bill was the chief. All right.
Anyway.
Awesome.
I'll
Well,
pick it up
welcome.
from here. Thank you. I want to say that we will. Okay.
Here, let's turn this on just a little bit.
Hold on.
Charles, can you turn it on just a little? Can you keep it really low?
I'm not. Okay. Anyway, I want to say we wrote this book for the general public. There's no rocket science in here. This is the big picture of the problem of high-level nuclear waste. Okay, so if I can get just organized for
Make sure you stand away from the podium because it'll affect that.
So I want to just take a few minutes here and talk about this problem of high-level nuclear waste and how it relates to San Onofre. Now, we all heard last August that the Aguirre-Lutz settlement agreement solved the problem. The San Diego Union Tribune picked up the story. They even ran an editorial in the LA Times written by the editorial board that the problem has been solved. The waste is going to be out of here maybe in as little as 5 years, so we can all relax and go home and watch TV. But the problem is, the problem has not been solved. When this settlement agreement came out, I read it several times very carefully. The only thing this settlement agreement accomplished was an absolute media coup in misleading the public that this problem is solved. I mean, it shot the entire opposition in the foot because most Southern Californians are like, everything's going to be fine. Now, what this settlement agreement says is that by October 2020, there will be a written plan for monitoring and inspecting the waste. Absolutely nothing is spelled out in terms of what this means. These are just words on paper. We'll have a written plan by October 2020. There's nothing about how often they would inspect it, how rigorous the inspection would be, not a word about this high-level nuclear waste sitting on the beach year after year, decade after decade, in a marine environment. So, okay, I lost my thought here. I was told to shorten my talk, so give me a second here. All right. So, okay. For 3 decades, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission played this game called the waste confidence decisions by way of deluding themselves and the nuclear industry that the waste problem would be solved. They first told us that we would have a repository by 2009. Then they said there would be a repository by the first quarter of the 21st century. In 2010, when Yucca Mountain was shut down, they dropped the charade, and now their website reads that we will have a geologic repository when needed, and the stranded nuclear waste will remain on site indefinitely. What this means for the nuclear waste that Edison is moving full steam ahead to bury on the beach is that this waste may be here forever. We're assured by the Aguirre-Lutz settlement agreement that this is not the case. Beginning in January, Edison is going to start giving us monthly progress reports. And we're also going to get quarterly progress reports about all their progress to get the waste out of here. Mike Aguirre's personal favorite is to move it to the Palo Verde nuclear generating station northwest of Phoenix. And why? Because Edison owns something like a 15% interest in Palo Verde, and therefore, the state of Arizona and the nice guys at Palo Verde are going to take 3.6 million pounds of high-level nuclear waste from San Onofre. You have to ask the question, why would another state take San Onofre's nuclear waste when they know it's going to be there indefinitely? But there are a couple of other possibilities, we are told. Waste control specialists in Andrews County, Texas, had plans to open an interim storage facility for spent nuclear fuel. Last spring, they withdrew their license application from the NRC, citing cost and the fact that San Antonians were speaking up and saying, no way, are you going to transport the country's spent nuclear fuel through our city? Hobbs, New Mexico is now seeing big dollar signs. They want to take all the country's spent nuclear fuel and the high-level defense waste. Hold on. But there's a problem here if you know anything about the decades of struggle and committed opposition that had to be overcome before the WIP site could be opened. That's the untold story Southern Californians don't know about, and it's not even high-level waste. WIP stores transuranic waste from the military, mainly rags, protective clothing, and equipment that have become contaminated with transuranics. They don't store high-level nuclear waste. Let's see, what else? It's interesting how many people around here are starting to talk up Yucca Mountain, when just a few years ago that name was anathema. In the last month, people have asked me, why don't we just move the waste to Yucca Mountain? There's a tremendous amount of confusion here about Yucca Mountain. The tunnel that we've all heard about, that people assume is the repository, was the research laboratory for studying the hydrogeology of the mountain. In 2010, when Yucca Mountain was shut down, Nevada has repeatedly promised that that repository will never be constructed. So I think we best believe them. The bottom line is that this settlement agreement has solved nothing. The bottom line is that the people of Southern California cannot relax because it's all going to be taken care of. Edison is now conducting dress rehearsals to move this waste onto the beach. If there was ever a time for citizens to speak up, to protest, to march, to call or write their representatives at the state and national level, to call or write the governor's office, and to let the NRC know that as long as that waste is sitting on the beach at San Onofre, they've got a big problem and they need to solve it.
Thank you very much. Step away from the podium. No feedback here. Although we do seem to get a lot of feedback when we go places and talk about stuff. So our next speaker is a geologist, actually a forensic geologist. He's been very helpful. He's part of the Public Watchdogs team. And also mentioning Public Watchdogs, they have a very important petition they failed to remind you about. So if you go to publicwatchdogs.org, please sign up on their petition. And also, you can be part of our effort if you just text SCGREEN at that number up there, and you're automatically on our mailing list that way. So I just want to take care of that business and then introduce you to Bob. Thank you. Robert Pope.
Hello, everybody. I'm Robert Pope. I am the chief scientist at publicwatchdogs.org. And I could talk with you for an hour about the science behind what's going on at Edison, but I'm going to give you just a little 2-minute tidbit about the geology. Back in 1971 in California, we had the San Fernando earthquake. It was a 6.6 magnitude quake that rocked Los Angeles, and it brought to the people of Southern California, again, our attention to the earthquake risk here. And what happened was the people of California responded to that earthquake by creating a law. It's called the Alquist-Priolo Act. And in 1972, December 22nd, 1972, that act was signed into law. And what that required was for surface ruptures of earthquakes in California to be mapped. And because we recognize that surface ruptures that are pre-existing are likely to rupture again, and if we map where these are, then we can design our cities around them rather than on top of them, and we can limit the risk to health and safety and loss of valuable infrastructure. And at that same time, Edison was constructing the nuclear power plant at San Onofre. They were constructing reactors number 2 and number 3. And what happened was when they did the grading work for reactor number 2, they found a fracture zone. And it was 6 parallel fractures that run parallel to the Christianitos fault. And the geologists at Fugro Engineering that assessed it identified it as active. So in 1975, a few years after the Alquist-Priolo Act was signed into law, we had a surface rupture that we didn't know about that actually went through the footprint of the not yet built reactor number 2. So, but there's an interesting thing about the state of California. The property that the San Onofre nuclear power plant is built on is federal land, so the state law doesn't apply. So instead of it being mapped on the Alquist-Priolo maps, there's a block where there's nothing mapped at that location. But being a responsible power company like Edison is, of course they assessed it additionally to find out if this fault was really active. So the next geologists they hired in identified 6 separate locations where it appeared to be active. So then they hired another geologist to assess those locations, to reassess those locations, and 4 of them, they came up with another reason why it appeared to be active. Then they hired another geologist to reassess the last 2, and then they built a reactor on top of that fault. So that's what happened. That's a little abbreviated history of 1975 to 1980 at the San Onofre nuclear power plant. We've got a fracture zone that runs through the property within 100 yards of where they're building the high-level nuclear waste repository. And the monolithic structure that they built there, it's all reinforced concrete. When you build a big monolithic structure and then you have a surface rupture, I don't care how well you engineered it, it's likely going to fail. Now, the earthquake that we had at San Fernando, that was a 6.6 earthquake that left Los Angeles reeling. And Edison's study funded by Edison that Scripps did, a professor by the name of Dr. Neil Driscoll came to the conclusion that we could have a 7.3 or 7.4 earthquake offshore of San Onofre. In a meeting in the city of Oceanside a few weeks ago, when he was asked, what happens if we feel an earthquake and we're at the beach, his answer to avoid the tsunami risk, get 10 to 20 meters above sea level and wait until you're instructed to do something further. So Edison's own geologist says the tsunami risk is so great you need to be 10 to 20 meters above sea level to be safe. The seawall that we have protecting the nuclear waste dump isn't that high. So I have a lot of grave concerns for what's going on here. I just wanted to touch a little bit with those 2, and you can feel free to track me down and ask additional questions. You can have public watchdogs come and speak at events. We're happy to talk for an hour and share all of the information we have with you. So thank you very much. Thank you for being like the people that caused that Alquist-Priolo Act to happen so that we could have mapping all over the state of California. I know that all of you together are taking action. We're going to get similar results on this one. We're going to win on this. We're not going to have a nuclear waste dump on our beach. Thank you.
Robert Pope. All right. Thanks very much. He's so right about people getting involved and we can't trust the experts, unfortunately. There's a lot of weight going against us, and the only counterbalance is us getting involved and speaking up and being here. So you guys are doing great. I have another speaker I'd like to introduce, Torgan Johnson from Solana Beach. He's been an activist on this issue, well-informed land planner. I'll let him fill you in more, and I think after that we'll give you some instructions what the next activity is. Thank you.
I want to say thank you for showing up. This is a fight that's been going on since I was a little kid. I'm originally from Malibu, and back in 1963 they planned a nuclear power plant in Malibu, and it was fought fiercely by the people in Malibu. They didn't want it there. It was going to be in Coral Canyon. It was 63, it was planned. In 70, it was killed. We knew that we'd have a situation like what you have today. So why are we here today? We're here today, really, come here guys. These are my kids. In 2011, I watched in horror as a planner as the northeast of Japan sank 3 feet and was inundated by the largest earthquake tsunami combination they had ever seen. And it wiped out 3 nuclear reactors and sent a plume up into the sky that settled back here in the western United States about 2 or 3 weeks later. We picked it up, radioactivity in organic milk that I was feeding my kids in 2011. Nuclear disasters travel entire Pacific basins in about 3 weeks, and it's picked up in the food chain. Nobody tracks it, nobody tells us about it. We have no idea how it impacts us, and I have no idea how much any of us ingest it and how that will affect our health. When you have a nuclear power plant 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 miles downwind, you're basically living on top of it. Because these disasters, according to Brookhaven National Labs, which did studies back in the 70s and 90s, they were talking about contamination zones when you have a fuel accident, spent fuel or nuclear waste accident, that go 500 miles downwind. They talk about immediate and latent deaths 500 miles downwind of the fuel when you have an accident with the fuel. They're moving fuel now and nobody's telling you about what's going on. They've had a lot of near misses at this power plant, along with all the other nuclear power plants around the world. The public has the right to know. The reason why we're here is the waste is going to outlast recorded history by a huge amount. The pyramids were 5,000 years ago. This waste is toxic for 250,000 years. We got our lights on for a few moments, and now we've got to babysit this fuel for eternity. We got to keep them safe and their great-great-great-great-great-great-grandchildren safe from this stuff. And this stuff is being dumped right here in the epicenter of California's surf culture. This is where modern surfing was born. The whole appreciation for the ocean, thinking of the ocean as recreation and as a friendly environment, not just a place to work and find food, but a place to enjoy as part of the paradise that we live on here. And so I do a lot of work in Hawaii with the Native Hawaiian community, and when we talk about planning, we talk about generations out. We don't talk about quarterly profits and the bottom line. Edison says that feels good here because it's commercially reasonable to dump the equivalent of several thousand nuclear bombs worth of plutonium in that fuel in your backyard, and that's commercially reasonable.
Boo.
It takes brave people to speak up and fight. There have been a lot of brave people at the power plant that have spoken up over the years. That's how I got involved in this fight. I know that's how Gary's got involved in the fight. That's how Jackson now, thank you Jackson, is bringing awareness to a whole nother generation. I need to teach my kids about this and their generations, how they have to protect themselves from this fuel. This is the first step for all of us to be here and say, you know what, this is not all right. This is not sane. This is not commercially reasonable. This isn't reasonable on any level. We got to get this stuff out of here as quickly and safely as possible, which it looks like it's probably going to be decades. So we need to have it here in as safe a configuration as possible, and that's not what Edison's got planned. So speaking up today is about thinking generations out, the way the Native Hawaiians do when they do things. And it's thinking about protecting your families and people that aren't even on the planet yet. It's such a huge problem, it's hard to get your head around it. When I got involved in the nuclear fight, it took me years to read and get up to speed on it. Now that I've got my head around it, it's become a focus in my life. And I think that all of you, the more you read, the more you learn, you'll feel the same thing too. There's one thing that can take you out, either as a weapon in a split second or as fuel leaking into the environment, and it changes your DNA that you pass on to your offspring. They take those mutations and damage with them. That becomes your family legacy. You want to fight this stuff, you want to make sure it's handled right, and it's going to take people like you to speak up. Just like Lori Donchak said and others said, you got to speak up and you got to call your elected officials and tell them this is not okay. So anyways, to sum it up, we got a big problem, but we got a big crowd. We've got a lot of spirit here. We've got people that have been in this fight. I know here at least for 40 years, Lynn Harris Hicks, I don't know, she's probably not here. An amazing woman at South San Clemente's been in this fight since they were planning the power plant. She's brought so much awareness over the decades, but I hope that all of you stay engaged in this fight, talk to others, extend awareness.
That's when needs to be called and emailed, right?
Okay, we've got information here of names. If you can get on Gary's mailing list, we can post this. But these are the people at the at the U.S. Nuclear Regulatory Commission that need to be informed that this is not okay, either here or anywhere else. And I just want to say one more thing too, is in talking with the Surfrider Foundation and others, the consensus is this fuel can't just be passed off to another community in deficient canisters. That's like handing them the world's largest dirty bomb. We're going to do it right in California. We're going to make sure this stuff is containered safely and that it goes to a consent-based site so nobody gets screwed in this deal. I also want to say, I know there are a lot of people from Japan who experienced the Fukushima disaster who got involved in the fight here in California to help us. They were concerned about the situation here. This is my other one. This is actually, his name is Del Mar. We just call him Del. But they've been involved in the fight. I see some of them here today. Brave people speaking out here and in Japan. This is a global problem. We're going to try to put the genie back in the bottle. I think we can do it. We're gonna give it a good shot here with this generation and now the younger generation getting involved in this fight. With that, I'm going to hand this back to Jackson here. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. All right, we're switching up. Can you guys hear me? All right. So those were some unbelievable speakers. And yeah, so we're going to come back. Well, first we're going to go on a little march. We're going to make sure the rest of San Clemente, the rest of California hears what we're trying to say. And after that, we're going to come back here for some pizza, some music, good vibes. And yeah, also if you want to ask questions to any of the speakers, they're all going to be sticking around. So got some burning questions, feel free to ask them. I got a rad little poster here if anyone wants to grab that. Ron, you look like you take that one. Yeah, it's going to be great. Make sure you guys hold up your posters when we're marching. We're going to have some chants. The first one is going to go like this. It's going to go like this. Edison will lie. People will die.
Edison will lie.
People will die. Edison will lie. People will die. Edison will lie. People will die. All right, we're going to start marching now, and then we'll turn back after a little bit.